Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar, Managing Work in Process in Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations. My name is Katie, and I will be the facilitator today. So if you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question area in the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen, and we will answer questions near the end. Just note, this session will be recorded and shared on our blog as well as with you early next week. Now, I would like to introduce our presenter today, Kaylee Acuna, Senior Solution Specialist on our Dynamics 365 F&O team here at Encore. Kaylee, I will pass it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Katie. So like she mentioned, today we're going to be talking about managing work in process, which we call WIP, and how best to achieve that in F&O, as well as some things that you can use to monitor and some helpful information when managing WIP in your system. So we're going to go ahead and go through the agenda. We're first going to start by defining WIP, because WIP from a system perspective is really important to understand, because the better we understand it, the better we are able to leverage the tools available in the system, and more importantly, understand what the system is trying to do. There's lots of things that it's trying to do to be helpful, and if we understand what those things are, it will make us more efficient at managing WIP itself. Then we're going to talk about how WIP is created. This will specifically relate to production posting and routes. We're going to talk about tools for managing and reviewing WIP, important metrics, and monitoring and alerts. This is sort of your average day-to-day tasks that would be associated with work in process and things that are happening in the business and on the production floor, and things that you can leverage within F&O directly to manage it. And then lastly, we're going to talk about the financial implications, specifically the posting and the general ledger for WIP. WIP represents a pretty significant value estimate, and it's generally very important from a finance perspective to understand what all of those pieces are and understand how they would be impacted and how best, again, to manage them. So sort of two sides to this presentation: management, understanding, and creation. Awesome. So just to get started, what is work in process? And work in process can be defined a few different ways in the system. So there's really two ways to approach WIP. There's a physical aspect to WIP, and there's a financial aspect to WIP. So it represents the value from a financial perspective of the materials, the labor, and the overhead that's been assigned to a specific production order, but has not yet been completed into a finished good in inventory. Finished good in inventory represents something that you can sort of ship and actually execute transactions on. WIP is a production that's still in process. This again seems pretty obvious, but it's physical goods that are in the process of being completed. They have not undergone all of the steps required for it to be considered finished inventory as defined by the business. And lastly, and this is important, WIP is never considered to be available inventory, meaning it cannot be shipped, which is sort of what I just mentioned. Cannot be shipped, it is work in process. So like I mentioned, the two camps for WIP is really critical, the physical and the financial. And this is important because understanding how these things play together is critical in how best to manage them and which pieces need to be managed, right? A person in finance may come up to you and say, hey, we've got this huge balance, what can we do about it? And knowing which transactional triggers relate to those financial postings will be critical in managing your WIP. And then on the physical side, from a production standpoint, having items move efficiently and quickly through the production process is, of course, the most efficient way to move things into your inventory. You don't want things just hanging out there all the time. So items in WIP, like I mentioned, cannot be shipped or transacted outside of production until they are completed. This includes raw materials, components moved but not yet used. Physical also represents anything that might be staged in anticipation of production. So if you have a staging location on your production floor where raw materials need to go and be staged before they get used, this would be considered physical WIP. Financial WIP is when something actually gets posted. If you're familiar with F&O, then you're familiar with the term of posting. This is sort of when any journal gets posted, that's when it sort of hits the general ledger, and production is no different. So from a WIP perspective, we've got production picking lists, route card journals, and report as finished goods journals. And all of these can be posted. All of them behave like other journals in the system, and I'll get into more detail about what those things represent as we get a little bit further into the presentation. All right, how is WIP created? So WIP can be created a few different ways, both physical and financial, right? So this is going to be a theme throughout this whole process, physical versus financial. So I'm actually going to pull our environment over, our sandbox, and show you a few different ways how a production order can actually be started. So the first way is an actual just production order, the creation of a manual production order. So if I navigate here to the hamburger menu, I go to modules, I go to production control, I go to all production orders, and then I open up this grid and I click new production order in the upper left-hand corner. It's going to pull up this little quick menu. This is how you just create one manual production order. This would generate work in process, but would not be any financial work in process at this point because nothing has been posted against it. This is considered physical only. So if you had, again, items that are being staged or queued up for production, you would create a production order for it to indicate that that's been started. But at this point, nothing financial has been touched yet. The other way that production orders can be created is through MRP, which is in master planning. So if again, I go here to production control, all production orders, and I go to planned production orders, this is where the master planning module will generate suggested production orders that need to be made to meet, demand signals of any kind, whether it's a sales order, whether it's a purchase order, whether it's a subcontracted order. Production is required to fulfill that demand, and the MRP that's configured within master planning is what generates those orders. So I don't have to create this manually, but I could come in here, select a planned production order, which is what the system has suggested as a production order that I need. And I could come in here and click firm, and then a real production order would be created. So then it would be in the same state as if I were to create it manually. Again, nothing financial yet has happened. This is considered physical only. And the last but not only way that production orders can be created is through a sales order. So if you have a sales order that you've created, and we have, let me pull up my order. If I open up my sales order, and let's say I need to produce this item in order to generate production to meet the supply that is required to ship out this order, I would come in here directly from my sales order, and then from the line menu, I'm going to select product and supply, and I'm going to go up here at the top and select new production order. This is going to open up a brand new window for creating a new production order. And this little pop-up is the same as if I were creating it manually, like I showed earlier from the all production order screen. However, this production order would be linked directly to the sales order that I was in when I generated it. So there would be sort of a link or a pegged link between the demand and the supply for this particular production order. So those are sort of the main sources for how physical WIP gets created. Again, it's all just production orders. At this point, all the production orders would be in a specific state that represents either estimated or created, so it hasn't been finalized yet, but the production orders exist, meaning supply is in process, but no financial posting has happened yet. So these are just overviews of what I just showed you: MRP, master planning, firming a planned production order, and producing a production order directly from a sales order. So next we have the financial WIP. So financial WIP is important because production is a huge expense in a business. In any business operations, WIP and work in process costs money. Being able to track which activities cost how much and tracking how each of those postings impact the general ledger and are impacted by the inventory that's physically being created. So financial is a really important piece to WIP. And so the first of the journals that I mentioned in the beginning is the picking list journal. So the picking list journal represents the sort of first interaction that you generally see with WIP from the general ledger perspective. So this represents the raw materials that are used on the production order that generally come from the bill of materials as defined on the product that's being produced. So although the items can be added to the specific production order, the bill of materials on the product generally serves as a guide for what components will be needed to make this finished good. And so from the production order, oh, here I will pull my system back over and show you where exactly you can view this information. So if we navigate back to production control in our modules, and I go to all production orders, and I go into my production order here, In the top menu, if I select Journals, View, and then Journals, I'm going to select the picking list journal. And so from here, you can see it looks just like any other journal in the system. If I click on the journal number, I can see items. These items, again, represent the raw materials or the components that are required to produce the finished good that we're making on our production order. So it's a picking list. Just like when you ship something out, you've got on a production floor, you may have a shelf or storage locations for these raw materials. They need to be physically picked off of the shelf so that they can be used in production. And you need to track that inventory to know when it needs to be replenished. So it has a picking list journal. It'll have locations just like you would when you're shipping, but this is production specific. So the reason this is important from a financial perspective is because all these items cost money. All of them have a value, right? And so when we execute a picking list journal and we post it, that's the first interaction that our production order has, our WIP has with the general ledger. So this is financial WIP. So this is inventory value that's been attributed to the WIP specific GL accounts that are set up in the system. So picking list journal, that's an important one. The next financial interaction that that work in process has with the general ledger is the route card journal. So again, from our production order up here under the view menu, under journals, we're going to select route card. So the route represents the operational steps used for this production order. So this is another point where, again, the general ledger will interact with WIP. Operations that are defined on the route for this product is essentially what steps does this item need to follow in order to become a finished good. So we first had our picking list, that's materials, the route represents our steps, and the resources that are used to do that. So that would be machinery, equipment, humans, those are all considered resources that have a financial value that are associated with your work in process. So to view what those end up being for your production order, you would drill into this route card journal after it gets posted, and you would see the operational number here, and you would also see the number of quantity that were reported for that step as good quantity. So if we had a production order for 120, as this example shows, and we say that this production order has gone through its first operation, which is operation number 10, and it produced 120 good pieces. So that's what we can expect the quantity to be represented in on the financial side of our work in process. So the last piece that WIP interacts with the GL is this reported as finished journal. So this represents when the production order is essentially completed. So when you have a final quantity, let's say your item that you're producing has gone through all of its operational steps, you've consumed all the raw materials that you need to make it. We're now saying we've completed this inventory. It's ready to be done. You create this reported as finished journal. You execute an actual quantity here. Again, you can see it's 120, and this represents the actual amount that will be attributed to the cost of this production order. So this will also include any overheads that are defined in the costing sheet as related to your manufacturing process. So if you have a 2% administrative overhead that you want to apply to every one of the items that you produce, when you report as finished and you post that report as finished journal, that's when those overhead costs get attributed to your WIP. I will then pull this aside and show you, so this is again an overview of what we just reviewed. We've got our picking list journal, which represents materials, route card, which represents operations, and reported as finished, which attributes the overhead cost. So each of these three pieces combine to give you your value of WIP, which is important. All right. So now that we understand what WIP is, how it's created, now we can talk about how to manage and review work in process. So these are just a couple of things that I like to call out because they are really the most important. There are many other things you could review, but I've sort of picked what I think are the two most important things that need to be maintained and monitored in order to have an efficient production process and get things to completion as quickly as possible. So the big one is expected delivery dates. So every production order, when it's created, whether it's created manually or from a sales order or from master planning, doesn't matter, will have an expected delivery date. What this means to the system is that this is the date that you're expecting this production order to be completed. And this is important because all the other things in the system are going to use your delivery date as a data point for when to convey to other departments or external customers when your production is expected to be completed. So if you have something that's out of stock, let's say it's in super high demand, you've got a ton of open orders for it, but you've got no inventory, people are going to be paying very close attention to this delivery date. So making sure that your delivery dates are kept up to date and kept accurate is really the best way to make sure that you're sending accurate signals to people who really are invested in when your production is going to be completed. So any outstanding WIP, anything that's lingering, anything that has a date in the past, like in my example here, this delivery date says 3/2. That means that to someone who's not in production, let's say I'm a salesperson and I'm going to place a sales order and I really want this item, this D0003, and I go to place an order, I'm going to think I have some available because it says the delivery date is 3/2. However, because there's no actual inventory, because the production hasn't been completed, it's still WIP. I can't ship anything. There's nothing on the shelf to actually ship. So maintaining delivery is crucial. There's a couple different places where you can maintain delivery dates. I would say by far the easiest one is just from the all production orders grid. So this grid that I showed you earlier, if we go here, all production orders, oops, clicked on the wrong one, all production orders. If we have all of our production orders listed, which right now I have mine filtered just to show two, you can see this delivery date. If you create a view that simply shows every production order that has a date that's today or in the past, save it as your own view and call it past due production orders, and someone reviews that weekly or daily, however frequent you think it needs to be reviewed, then you can go in and maintain those delivery dates and you can update them so that they more accurately reflect when things will be completed. Nothing is more tedious than having a past due delivery date, because then people will be emailing you and sending you messages saying, where is my stuff? So expected delivery dates. The other thing that's really important to monitor with work in process is the inventory that you have of your raw materials or your components. So I mentioned this earlier, right? Our picking list journals represent the items that are required to produce our finished good. So if we're producing, in my example here, if I'm producing a stereo and it includes a wiring harness and a speaker unit and a crossover and a cabinet and a speaker, I need all of those raw materials or those components to be in stock so that I can actually produce my stereo unit, right? And if they're not in stock, then the delivery dates that I'm putting out there for other departments to use are going to be inaccurate. And the best way to review that, and here I will show you, is from your production order. And I will go into here, and we go up here into view, and we go up here to explosion. So this is where you can actually view the inventory that's required to produce your finished goods. So this tells me I'm trying to make a standard speaker, standard stereo speaker, and it's made of these 5 items. And then if I click here on critical on-hand inventory, this is where you can see what the quantity that is required by my production order is. So here I've got 20, the actual quantity available, and the physical inventory that's available to produce this item. So if anything is critically out of stock or gets stolen by another production order or whatever the situation might be, you can view it here. Now, I'd like to clarify that this isn't the only place to view this. Obviously, it's not feasible to go into every single production order to review critical inventory. The system already has tools in place to not allow you to, for example, release a production order if you've got no stock of your components. Those are configurations that we can do. This would be if you have a specific production order that you're keeping an eye on. Maybe it's high priority, maybe it's an ASAP order, it needs to get out right away. This is exactly where you would want to go to review that. All right. So once we've reviewed our delivery dates, the inventory stock of our components, making sure things that are critical are not out of stock, and considering all of the other configurations, which I could talk all day about, safety stock, minimum order quantities, there are lots of tools in the system that can allow you to make sure you don't run out of anything, especially critical components. But this is a place per production order where you can review that critical inventory. All right, the last sort of key to this work in process management is the financial implications. This, I have, in my experience, people often don't think about the financial implications because production, we care about when is my stuff going to be done, when's it going to be available to be shipped. But the finance piece is really important, and it's really important that it doesn't get left behind. So understanding how your WIP posts to the GL, that interaction it has, where those configurations come from, are all really critical to managing your WIP. Because I promise, if at the end of a quarter or whatever cycle it is that you're reviewing things, if there is work in process that is outstanding or has costs that are really abnormally high, it's going to be really noisy, right? That's exactly the kind of financial reporting that raises red flags. So from a work in process perspective, from a production order, and actually here I will also show you where this is. Oops, bear with me. So from a production order, if I go up here to manage costs and I click here on production posting, you can see all of the journals that I talked about earlier. So this gives me a list of material consumption, route consumption, report as finished, indirect cost, and costing. So we already covered material consumption, routes, and reported as finished. This indirect cost happens automatically as a result of this report as finished. It's that overhead that I mentioned. And then lastly, we have this costing. So costing happens at the very end of the production order. After you've reported as finished, there's one more final status that you can put the order into, which is ended. This is typically done by a finance person because there can be different cost adjustments that need to happen after the inventory is physically completed, but before the financial stamp gets put on the order. That's what this row represents. And so we have our material consumption. That's our bill of materials, that's our components, that's the picking list journal, the items we consumed. Route consumption is those operations we talked about, reported as finished, and indirect are those overheads, that final quantity that goes into finished goods inventory. And then finally our costing. So these are journals that directly get posted against the GL. You can view vouchers for each one of these steps. You have settings configured throughout the system that attribute to this financial value of this production order, and it's crucial to understand how these work. And now I put this together in another sort of format to help understand how the transactions, the transactional steps line up with the financial steps. So you go through this production process and the production order is going through these different statuses, right? So those are represented in the purple bars, estimated, and then a production order is started, and then a production order is reported as finished, and then it's ended. So when you're estimated, there's no GL posting. When it's started, that's when you start picking components and going through your operations. Reported as finished is your final quantity. Those journals get posted directly to the GL. And then finally it's ended, and that final sort of snapshot of that production order gets pushed to the GL. Now, the reason you have reported as finished versus ended, and you're probably thinking, how is that different? But again, the ended status is that financial stamp. That's really what that represents. And the reason why it's different is because you may have situations where your production was done wrong. Maybe something was reported as finished, it was completed, but it needs to be reversed because somebody used the wrong component. So all the way up until reported as finished, you can reverse your production order, and it goes all the way back in WIP. So it reverses all your journals, it puts back all of that posting, all of your WIP then becomes available again, and then you can make whatever changes you need to. So there's a huge amount of configurability to when stuff posts, how it posts, whether it's done at the beginning of the process or at the end, or whether it's done manually. There's all kinds of ways that we can configure this, but it's important to remember how each of these statuses lines up with the posting to understand sort of the whole picture of WIP. We've got physical and financial. So for each of these transactions, the voucher is posted. So the difference between physical and financial WIP is key, but understanding both is critical in the management of WIP. And so I hope that this has been helpful. If there's any questions, please let me know. I know that this is a lot of information. I think I could make a webinar about each of the tiny topics I talked about, like configuration for master planning, firming of production orders and configuration of production posting. But I hope this was helpful as an overview for work in process and some tricks for understanding and managing it.
All right. right, thank you, Kaylee. So again, if anyone does have any questions, please enter them into the question area in the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. See that there. In the meantime, I'm going to add a link to our events page in the chat. So if you'd like to check out some previous sessions or register for a few upcoming webinars, you can do that on this page. So that link is in the chat there. Okay, and I'm also going to add a link where you can set your email preferences. So you can opt into our emails and stay in the know about upcoming events, as well as our latest blog articles. Both of those are in the chat here. And Kaylee, I do see a question that has come through. So that is, how would you get the list of inventory items into your WIP?
Yeah, the list of inventory items, do they mean the items that are used within the production? I guess if that's what we mean by inventory items, meaning the items that have been used in production, the best way to do that would be to configure the products that will be produced with their bill of materials and all of the components and raw materials that they will be expected to use to produce those items. So the BOM is what drives what inventory items are used in production. Within each production order, excuse me, you can actually add items just ad hoc as needed, but the BOM is what will serve as the sort of baseline for what production is expecting to need from inventory to produce those goods.
Okay. Next question here, Kaylee, is how customizable to a particular type of production is this?
Oh, extremely customizable. All of the phases that I sort of discussed with regards to the picking list journal and then also the route cart journal and the route operations. The route operations can represent any steps in production. So it doesn't have to be um, tailored to any one kind of production. So when I reference the route card journal and the first operation step is just number 10, that's just an arbitrary number that I assigned to represent the first operation. That operation could be, if you're producing, like in my example, speakers, that could be just the actual maybe the assembly of the speaker unit to the speaker housing. If you're producing something that requires a formula, like any kind of food product or liquid or something like that, it could be the actual combining of two materials. Each of those operation steps can represent any production process, really. And actually, within those production steps, you can have various subcontracting. So if you need to send raw materials out to be processed before they can be used in your finished good, subcontracting can also be configured within those operations. So highly configurable.
Okay. Follow up to that first question, Kaylee, is the item that has been picked and outstanding on the GL would be open orders.
Sorry, say that one more time.
So the first question there is how to get the list of inventory items into WIP.
Uh-huh.
And then a follow-up to that was the item that has been picked and outstanding on the GL
hmm
is open orders.
it's not essential. It's not really open orders. It's more like open picked. So it's not quite open sales orders, but if you were to look at that raw material from the on hand list, for example, you would see that that item doesn't show as available because it's been pegged or associated with that production order that it's being used on. So the picking list journal from the production order is what we will use to sort of pull that inventory, and then it won't be available. And so I guess from that perspective, the open production order is the open order, but it's not like an open sales order the way you're thinking of an open sales order, if that makes sense.
All right. Thank you, Kaylee. We are at time for today. So if anyone has any outstanding questions that we weren't able to get to, you can leave them in the question box and we will get back to you either by email later today. And you will get a recording of this session just as a reminder. So thank you everyone for joining us today. And thank you, Kaylee, for the information. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Awesome. Thank you.